see the stuffed guinea pig billboard on the right, demonstrating Mendel's laws of dominance and recession, in the background on the left. So this will increase hygiene and sterilization, both in the environment, which I'm giving you a streamlined stove designed by Geddes, and in the genes, so the nature versus the nurture. And it's not easy for me to summarize the argument I make in this chapter, but the idea is that I looked back into the history of germ theory and the history of disease, and where defectiveness and disease and the unfit and all of that, what were the thoughts about where disease came from? Well, clearly the germ theory, which was widely accepted, says it's from the environment. The germs are in the environment, you become susceptible, you are exposed to them and you get sick. So part of the history of streamlined design and modern design in general is about paring away any extraneous parts that are sticking out because of the actual liability of germs harboring in those crevices, causing sickness in the home. So you want to have bare strip surfaces, things that can be wiped down with Lysol, spray hose, all of these things to clean up the environment so you don't get sick. On the other hand, if you look at the way eugenicists understood, some of them at least, understood disease, they basically said, well, you expose 20 people to the same germ, some of them will get sick, some of them won't. Why is that? Well, it's because they're genetically susceptible. That was the argument that was made. So my chapter basically says this is an unresolved conflict, and the way you get modernity and purity and lack of disease is to do both. And so I look at the ways that eugenicists and designers tried to clean up the environment through sterilization and hygiene in their own respective areas and ways. The last chapter just basically looks at the allure of the ideal type for both designers and eugenicists. Superman was born in the 1930s, okay? And that's just one example of many of this idea of we can create, the actual bottom of this article says someday scientists might be able to create mental or physical Superman at will. Here you see, this is from Popular Science Monthly. This was actually something Egmont Ahrens clipped out and saved, so it was in his archive as a designer. Future man will be a handsome Apollo with long legs and short arms. It shows him kind of blessing like Christ. He looks like the Apollo Belvedere, which is in the background shadow. And it's all about the ability of scientists to predict and control reproduction, to create the kinds of humans that they want to create. A corresponding rhetoric occurs in streamlining literature, where designers create always the ideal type. I created the perfect gas stove, the ultimate refrigerator, and part of this is advertising rhetoric. But it actually was a problem for them because year by year, they had to create the next ultimate refrigerator. So the allure of the ideal type at the needs of mass production, this is actually kind of a philosophical and production quandary that is common to eugenics, it's common to genetic engineering, it's common to cloning, and it has stuff to do here. So I'm just raising it as a bigger issue. What is the norm? What is the ideal type? How do we perceive a good design? That's what this chapter kind of unravels and talks about. All right, so the very last thing I want to do is just raise like 5 or 6 big issues, and this will be quick, on how I think that historical precedent is relevant to thinking about today, emergent genetic architecture and design in particular, which is my interest. The rhetoric of the avant-garde is very, very similar. Each group, 1930s now, thinks they're absolutely cutting edge, breaking new paths. Today, there's no doubt that the virtual and the real, that products and bodies are merging. There's this kind of, there is a change that's happening. So I'm not totally dissing this idea of the avant-garde. But the ways that people conceive of themselves as being cutting edge, as if that's self-justifying in its own right, I think it's interesting to pay attention to that. Also the talk that these things are inevitable. We have no choice. Technology is going this way. It's a fast pace, and we have to adapt to it. I think that is a rhetoric that's common to both, but it dismisses the responsibility of making conscious choice about the actions and the choices that you make and their political and social outcomes. And so one of the things I'll be doing in my new research project is to look at the problematic assumptions beneath this type of rhetoric. For example, here I'm giving you the 2 images I showed you before, the coat and the rings. And a little bit of the wall text that Paola Antonelli put up at MoMA. One of the things she said is, quote, adaptability is a fundamental trait of human nature, but today's instant variations in rhythm call for something stronger, elasticity, the ability to grasp progress and make it one's own. She called the show Design in the Elastic Mind, and her focus is actually on an elastic intelligence that can adapt to these types of complex systems that are pervading our culture and our environment and scientific arena as well. And she basically stated on the website that the goal of the purpose of the exhibition is to catalyze these technologies. there was very little questioning, and I'm not having time to go into some of the pieces that were in the show and their kind of racial ramifications, their social vision, their class assumptions. So there's a lot behind me saying this, that I felt like there was kind of no contextualization offered in the show. It's simply, here is really cool science, really cool design, and let's go with it. And actually, that again goes back to the 1930s, this idea that it's carrying us along. The river is taking us and we better go with it. And I'm not opposed to technology, by the way. I just want to ask some questions about social, cultural impact and ideology. The other thing I'll show you in just a second is what happened to that little leather coat into the show. Here you see, I'm giving you the citation, and again, when I take this down, I'll show it to you. Paula Antonelli had to, quote unquote, kill it, and she lost a lot of sleep because it began to exceed its little glass boundary. So it raises some really interesting questions about the future of this type of design, which I'll just let you ponder over the various possibilities. And I also say check out the public comments, which I'll let you see a few of. So along the lines of Antonelli saying this is progress, I want to know, what is progress? That's a pretty problematic historical term. What values are favored and communicated by emergent genetic architecture and design? Sorry about the cutoff. How are avant-garde works today tied to privileged access to information, capital, and power? Who has control in these designs and in the future that these designers project? And lastly, why does the word genetic appear again and again, along with phrases like design, DNA, species, and typology, but the word eugenic is never used, even though improvement is the goal? I think eugenics is a dirty word that people want to write into the past, but in fact, my definition of eugenics is controlling evolution with the goal of improvement, generally focusing on the human population. So there's a lot of this that's, I think, assumptions that we know what progress is, we know what improvement is, we can do it with genetics. Well, that sounds a lot like eugenics to me. So based on those questions, I think there are ongoing issues of access and control, configurations of social, political, economic, and intellectual power. Two examples of that. I'm showing you a book, Cover, 2002, by Gregory Stock, who directs the, I think, program in science and medicine and society at UCLA. Redesigning Humans, Our Inevitable Genetic Future. He said that the book designer gave him a great cover, which is a young, non-aging, blonde-haired, blue-eyed individual. This is our inevitable genetic future. Okay, he actually talks about this in the book. He says we all think that that's the most beautiful type, so we all choose it. He says marketing and advertising copies that type because we all think it's the most beautiful. Okay, really naive from the cultural studies standpoint. I'm putting it up here because people think this is in the past, and he's the smart guy. On the right is a piece that was in the show at MoMA. I love it, actually, Elio Cacciavalli, his Fertilitoys from the Future Families Project. What he did is create really beautiful toys. This is a little egg, and then he has a little sperm next to it, and he has a full-on tummy that's this yellow thing you see behind. And the idea is that because surrogacy and all other types of reproduction are so common these days, how are you going to tell your kid where the kid came from? So you need to be able to have the little miniature sperm donor sperm, the egg donor egg, the toy that, I mean, the tummy that you stick it into. You actually can literally stick them all into each other. And then right next to it, he had a little balloon in a frame that blows up over 9 months, so that when the surrogate in India is having your child and you're back in New York City, you can watch the dining room table, you know, the balloon just expands for about 9 months, and it comes with a pin, and when the baby's born, you pop the balloon, and that's your placenta, and you put it in the frame, and you hang it on the wall. So that's his Fertilitoys project. Interesting, pretty fun, pretty open-minded. He says, you know, you can have a lesbian couple, you can have a gay couple, whatever. He's open to anything when it comes to reproduction. But looking here at the actual tags, when I got in close, and I'm sorry, my camera, it was really hard to get a good photo with 300 people around in my poor camera. But can you see any of this? It tells you the characteristics of who the egg donor is. It did this for the sperm donor, it did this also for the surrogate. Basically, the sperm donor and the egg donor, race, Caucasian, heritage, Irish. The sperm donor was German. She has blue eyes and light brown hair. He had blonde hair and green eyes. They have fair-colored skin. They're college-educated. They like sports. They play music, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and it tells what they got paid. The surrogate, it doesn't say race. It says that this person is Christian, but it leaves race out of it completely. I'm just wondering, how can you, in good conscience, as a curator, I think the artist might be poking fun at these ideas, but the curator just puts this out as if this is good design and where we're going with genetic technologies. So I think there's more for me to learn about this piece, but again,